I was born in Reading, Pennsylvania, and after my education in this country, I went to study Yeats in Ireland and never returned to live in the United States. Instead, I went to London, started to work in publishing. My mother said, "You'll meet a nice English boy and never come home," and that's exactly what happened, but we've lived very happily there.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, and the rest is history, and I've worked as a freelance editor. I've worked mentoring students with disabilities at Staffordshire University and several other things. My mother died about, well, I've given you a date of when she died and I can't remember, but probably about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And she had written letters home on a very regular basis from the time she went to college, and her mother kept them all and returned them to her when she was pregnant with her first child.
Oh, wow.
And when she died, she still had these letters, and they went to my sister initially, and I don't think my sister was terribly interested in them, and eventually sort of said, "Here, you have them." And I read them over a period of time, and of course I was interested when I came across the reference to Whitesbog, because I don't remember her talking about that summer at all. And as I said earlier, I just sort of idly Googled Whitesbog and was absolutely amazed that it was preserved in a historic village, and I thought it would be wonderful to visit it. My mother initially went to Swarthmore, and I think she basically flunked out in her first year. And her older sister, who she refers to as the genius daughter, was doing very well in zoology at Mount Holyoke, and I think encouraged Mom to go there, where she always said she was given more faculty support than she had at Swarthmore, and that really got her back up to speed and restored her confidence. She obviously wanted both my sister and me to go to Mount Holyoke, and my sister was not interested, but she did persuade me in the end. And I thought, wow, this place is gorgeous, and I'm all for it. So we did have that very important bond, and it was a lovely bond between the two of us, and also with her sister. She was very close to her sister. The genius moved to the West Coast and got a doctorate in zoology at Berkeley. And then when I was a kid, she had a family in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Okay.
So we didn't see a whole lot of her, but whenever she came east, we would see her. And I mean, my mother was a funny person, but my aunt was whacker. She was hilarious. So we always really enjoyed her.
Yeah. So you've been most kind in providing us with excerpts from your mother's letters that she had written prior to, during, and after her time at Whitesbog to her parents. And some of these entries, I think, provide great insight into her time here. And if I may, I'd like to share a few quotes from some of these letters, and maybe we can talk about them. In a letter that she wrote to her mother while at Mount Holyoke on April 7th, 1935, so this would have been a few months prior to her arrival at Whitesbog, she writes, "At first I almost decided on Camp Morris this year and a settlement camp next year. But then I remembered that I wanted a change of atmosphere this year. I am writing to scads of camps and still more trying to get real information as I had concerning the East Side settlement. Approve?"
At Mount Holyoke, she majored in sociology, and she was very, very interested in issues like child labor, sort of issues of social justice generally, opportunities for poor people. And I think a lot of that influence came from her mother, who never worked as far as I know, but I think who was very involved in sort of church and charity work. And I know that there's this link with the settlement, and I cannot remember the name of the woman who founded the settlement house in New York. And is it Gilbert? Elizabeth Gilbert?
That I don't know.
I can try to find out.
That's another thing for us to research, right?
Yeah. I remember her talking about this woman, and I'm not sure what the settlement house was, but it was very famous.
Yeah.
And whether it was rehoming women, I don't know. So I think that's probably, Camp Morris was just a summer camp that she had enjoyed as a child and worked then as a counselor.
Moving a month ahead, on May 26, 1935, I find it to be a most insightful letter as she expresses a great desire to be offered the position to work at Whitesbog over other opportunities she had. And she writes, "I thought the Morris question was settled years ago, or I would have written. Miss Lowry," who we have discussed, Miss Lowry is the woman who kind of headed up this Council of Women for Home Missions, has an application from me applying for a 6 weeks job, July 15th through August 30th, or thereabouts, plus a picture and a letter from Mrs. Miller of Madison. And this is what's most telling. She says, she's got to give me the job because I want to do it more than anything.
Yeah.
So it's no to Morris. I suppose there's a slight chance that Morris might have a vacancy if the Council of Home Missions doesn't take me.
Presumably, she was not paid while she was here. I don't know, but
Yeah, that I
would
haven't
imagine
verified
she
either.
wasn't paid. Whereas if she'd been a camp counselor at Morris, she would have been paid.
Yeah.
And those girls always did work, so it would mean that she didn't have the income from a summer job when she went to college in the autumn.
Right.
So I don't know, she obviously had become really interested in these types of issues and wanted to get stuck in.
We're going to a letter dated July 14th, and she's now at Whitesbog and begins to provide detailed glimpses of her days spent here and those whom she's interacting here during that summer. She writes, Eleanor and I have just returned from a ramble in our new Chevy 28. Ain't that exciting? Miss Lowry was down yesterday. She's been looking for a car for us for a long time because our center is fairly far from everything and food supplies. Miss White, so her first mention of Miss Elizabeth, has let us use hers a bit, but only a bit.
Yeah.
So we rejoice. The roads are horrid because of walking because of the sand. Also, now we can give the kiddies raw carrots sometime and get weenies for roast when we need them in a hurry.
That was just Mom all over.
That's your mom,
and
right?
she remained incredibly enthusiastic about things. And she, in her later life that we'll get to later, she was a camp director. And she loved the whole idea of camping and the benefits that it gave to children, particularly disadvantaged children.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, she would be the one going out buying the hot dogs for a hot dog roast and enjoying every single moment of it. Yeah.
This next passage kind of really talks about her downtime because her fellow mates, as you will, kind of went off. So I'm going to read a little bit about this. I had a long, hard day yesterday. Miss Lowry arrived at noon and drove Eleanor to Plainfield with her so she could bring the chariot back. Mm-hmm. I assume that's the car. So I had the center to myself another afternoon. Only it wasn't so bad. A small bunch of youngsters, an angelic 4 months baby, long naps, after which they all went swimming in 2 feet of water and had a glorious time while I was amused with 2 babies on the shore. I beamed fondly and proudly on my large and adorable family. So I think that's also very telling.
Also the fact that she came from a very close family,
Mm-hmm.
and I think she had quite a special childhood, and the 3 children were very close together and remained very close
Mm-hmm.
through their adulthood and had obviously many, many fond memories.
This next passage kind of gives us a glimpse of how hard it must have been when she first came here with the children, not knowing them, and then kind of what transpired. So she writes, at 9 or so, we opened the dance hall and shooed the little ones home. Much noise and confusion, but they really went. And when I asked them at 10, they are really getting respect and obey us. They didn't at first as much.
Presumably, up until that point, she had never had any experience of children other than sort of middle class children, you know, who came from that kind of a background. And so these children from Philadelphia must have been an entirely different breed to her, but she certainly enjoyed them.
One of the last passages I want to go over is the following summer of 1936. Your mother compares her time working with tobacco workers in Bloomfield, Connecticut, and she compares that experience to her prior summer at Whitesbog. And she writes, the whole situation here is so different from Whitesbog. I don't know how much of this I wrote before. The only families are those who live all year round on the plantation in small but clean little houses with green yards and enormous gardens. During the summer, most of these houses are overcrowded because they all take boarders. Yeah. Some of them are regular commercial boarding houses, and one in particular, Lane's, is really bad. The rest of the laborers live either in company boarding houses or come in by the truckload from Hartford by the day.
I know that, as I mentioned before, she became much more involved with because she was there. I'm not actually sure what she was there doing, but I think she was doing more research for her senior thesis
Mm-hmm.
and less of caring for children, but she may have been doing that as well. And I know that she became involved with the various stages of the tobacco picking, curing, and so on. And as I said, she proudly reported that she smoked a cigar, hand rolled, of course. And I sort of vaguely remember her talking about the tobacco pickers, and I guess later on I thought, what on earth was she doing? And because I don't remember her ever talking about Whitesbog, I can't really compare the two.
Yeah.
But they certainly fed into her desire to do that kind of work in
Yeah.
future.
Yeah. So I have one last letter, and this was written the fall of her senior year in October 1936. And she writes, I have definitely decided to make my paper, her thesis, I assume, a statistical study of child labor in agriculture. And that means migrants. I begin by sending a form letter to the 48 capitals of the 48 states for migrant information, exclamation mark.
Yeah.
I end with a statistical report.
I don't know if there was any
Relationship
further
with her?
contact, and I also wonder whether it was through my mother's mother, my grandmother, that she made contact with the council and
Okay.
Miss Lowry.
Okay.
I'm not sure about the order of this, but she did go, when she left Mount Holyoke, I believe, she was hired by a very eminent sociologist who worked out of Chicago, I think, and they investigated child labor in TIF mines in the Ozarks. And this was at the height of the Depression, and I could provide you with some of those letters if you wish.
Yeah, that would be great.
Again, she didn't write a great deal, probably because she was exhausted, but I remember her vividly talking about this, that they were going, it was basically like a home industry, and these people would have pits in their front yard,
Mm-hmm.
and because the kids were little, they would send the kids down the pits to bring up this tiff, and I can't remember what the tiff was used for.
Mm-hmm.
And they were often met, as you might imagine, with terrific hostility
Yeah,
because they were interfering, academics.
right.
And the people were literally dirt poor.
Mm-hmm.
The children were not sent to school. The children had no shoes. They were dressed in rags. I think she found it very, very difficult to deal with. And she writes, her parents were horrified. First of all, she was traveling around with a man and no chaperone, but also because of what she was seeing and encountering.
Yeah.
And she wrote in one letter to her father, she said, I've learned I see what I see, and at the end of the day, I sort of go outside, breathe fresh air, and I can forget about it. But I wonder if she could forget about it. I think it must have been very, very difficult. So they wrote up their report, and she was credited on the report, which is very nice. I've got a copy of that, which is called Child Working in the TIF Mines or something. And she then worked in insurance for a year just to earn money, which she did very successfully, but hated the job. And she then joined the YWCA. My father, who she met about that time, worked in the YMCA, so that was quite handy. And she went on to work in the YWCA for the rest of her life with about 14, 15 years off to raise 3 kids. And she was the director in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania of the Y-Teen program.
Okay.
So she was mainly working with teenage kids.
Yeah.
And that was all through the period of the folk music revival, the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
She was a real campaigner for civil rights and carried on being very interested in issues of social justice until the end of her life.
And how old was she when she?
92.
92.
Yeah. And she was quite a remarkable woman. I don't remember her ever talking about Whitesbog, the tobacco farms, a little bit. When I read these letters and then Googled and discovered that you were here and that there was an actual place that I could visit, and also finding out about this, the migrant workers coming out from Philadelphia And, you know, this vision of having a big party on a Saturday night with pots of spaghetti bubbling away and everybody digging in and having a good time.
Yeah.
I expect there was a little red wine involved as well. It's just fabulous to be able to come here.
Yeah.
Seeing the landscape, learning about the various parts of the working landscape here, but also walking out to Florence and seeing the pool the pond where she might have been bathing with the children and admiring her family. It just brings it all to life, and I'm sure she would have been absolutely thrilled that I was here today.
Yeah, it's a very special moment. Yeah.
I mean, obviously she was a huge influence, and both my parents were very brave about the civil rights during the 1960s, during which our street was integrated. And the people who moved in who were black were threatened. And my parents were the first people to walk down the street, knock on the door, and welcome them to the neighborhood. And I'm still immensely proud of them for that.
Yeah.
So they were both motivated that way. And I think all of us inherited that awareness of what can happen when people are marginalized because of their income or their race or their sexual orientation or whatever. And although I haven't been involved with, we're all involved with camping. We grew up doing that. But just perhaps more aware of issues like that than we would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
She had just completed her sophomore year, so she was probably 19, 20 when she was doing this. And I think it's quite an incredible thing that she was willing to give up a summer and come here when she could have been out at Stony Brook at my great aunt's house, just enjoying herself. And I think that's really admirable. Just seeing the landscape, walking out to Florence, it was really magical. Fantastic. And I've got a piece of brick to take back home with me. And I also picked up a little one for my sister, so.